Troilus and Criseyde by Geoffrey Chaucer is a romance story set in ancient Greece. It was written by Geoffrey Chaucer between 1382 to 1386. It was written in 5 books which chart the rise and fall of the characters' love affair. Troilus and Criseyde begins during the Trojan War. The story of Troilus and Criseyde is not original to Chaucer. It is translated. Chaucer's main source appears to be Boccaccio's Il Filostrato. The poem is written in rime royal, a stanza form consisting of 7 lines with iambic pentameter. Plot summary. In this story, Criseyde, a Trojan maiden, is abandoned by her treacherous father, Calchas, who joins the Greeks. Troilus, a prince and soldier of Troy, falls deeply in love with Criseyde and seeks the help of Pandarus, her uncle and his friend, to bring them together. Initially uncertain, Criseyde eventually reciprocates Troilus's love. However, tragedy strikes when Calchas demands Criseyde's return to him, forcing her to leave Troy. Despite her vows of faithfulness, it becomes evident that Criseyde betrays Troilus after her departure, leaving him heartbroken. This bittersweet love story prompts the reader to reflect on the true nature of love and the moral dilemmas confronted by the characters. Let's see the summary in detail. Book 1. In the opening of the first book, a small poem is addressed to Tisiphone, a Fury, as a prayer for the forthcoming lovers. The poem also hints at the double sorrow that Troilus will experience, foreshadowing the doomed nature of their love. The story is set during the Trojan War, with the Greeks camped outside the walls of Troy. Calchas, a soothsayer, predicts the fall of Troy and switches sides, leaving behind his daughter, Criseyde. Vulnerable and alone, Criseyde seeks the protection of Hector, her uncle and a Trojan prince. Meanwhile, Troilus, Hector's brother and a soldier in the Trojan army, is in the temple of Pallas Athena with his knights. He mocks his companions for being lovesick and believes that those who are in love are foolish. However, he is struck by the god of love when he sees Criseyde and instantly falls in love with her. Troilus spends days in agony, struggling with his newfound lovesickness and unsure of how to proceed. Pandarus, Criseyde's uncle, becomes Troilus's confidant and advises him to repent and humble himself before the god of love. Together, they devise a plan for Troilus to express his feelings to Criseyde. Book 2. The second book begins with a poem addressed to Clio, the muse of history, where the author prays for her assistance in writing the book well and in rhymed form. Pandarus, driven by his own feelings of unworthiness for love, decides to help Troilus and Criseyde unite. He visits his niece, Criseyde, and playfully teases her to lift her spirits. After a lengthy conversation, Pandarus reveals Troilus's feelings for her. He urges Criseyde to consider Troilus as a potential love interest and manipulates her by claiming that both he and Troilus will commit suicide if she does not reciprocate his love. Criseyde, aware of societal pressure to marry, contemplates the idea. The first window scene occurs when Troilus returns from a battle and walks proudly down the street, receiving both admiration and embarrassment. Criseyde watches him from her window and ponders the advantages and disadvantages of having a lover. She acknowledges her vulnerability and the need for protection, but also recognizes that entering into a relationship with Troilus would mean sacrificing her freedom. Criseyde goes to her garden with her ladies, where she overhears Antigone singing a song about love. That night, she dreams of a large white eagle, symbolizing Troilus, gently taking her heart and replacing it with his own. The exchange of letters between Troilus and Criseyde begins, closely monitored by Pandarus. He encourages both parties to be open and immediate in their responses. Troilus writes a passionate letter to Criseyde, sealed with his tears as suggested by Pandarus. Pandarus delivers the letter to Criseyde and urges her to reply promptly. requesting a meeting with Troilus. Reluctantly, she writes a letter in response. More letters are exchanged, fostering the growth of their relationship. Pandarus visits Deiphobus to arrange a meeting between Troilus and Criseyde. They plan to have the meeting at Deiphobus's house, and Pandarus invites Criseyde. Unbeknownst to her, Pandarus has already brought Troilus to the house, feigning illness and advising him to rest in bed. When Criseyde arrives, Pandarus takes her to Troilus's chamber, and the two lovers finally meet face to face for the first time. Book 3. Book 3 opens with a poem dedicated to Venus, the goddess of love. The poem praises her divine power and seeks her blessings for the love between Troilus and Criseyde. The story resumes where Book 2 left off, with Criseyde being brought to Troilus's chamber in Deiphobus's house. Troilus passionately expresses his devotion to Criseyde and offers to serve her. Criseyde agrees, though with some hesitation. Both Pandarus and Troilus are overjoyed. Over a period of time, Troilus and Criseyde exchange letters and meet frequently, nurturing their growing love for each other. One evening, as rain threatens to fall, Pandarus invites Criseyde to his house for dinner. She accepts the invitation, and while they dine, Troilus secretly observes them. As the rain intensifies after supper, Pandarus convinces Criseyde that it would be unsafe for her to return home in such weather, and persuades her to stay the night. Leading Criseyde to a private chamber, Pandarus concocts a false story about Troilus being jealous due to rumors about Criseyde's other suitors. Pandarus insists that she speak to Troilus directly to resolve the misunderstanding, and brings him into the chamber. Criseyde, in tears, reassures Troilus that the rumors are untrue. In the midst of heightened emotions, they decide to put the conflict behind them and embrace. The couple exchanges vows reminiscent of a marriage before spending an intimate night together, parting at dawn. Pandarus advises Troilus to exercise caution in the relationship, reminding him of the fickle nature of fortune's wheel and how swiftly one's fate can change. Troilus and Criseyde continue to spend nights together, and their love fills their lives with bliss. Troilus, invigorated by this newfound love, becomes a more virtuous and honorable soldier. Book 4. Book 4 opens with a poem addressed to Mars, the god of war, and the three Furies. Unlike condemning Criseyde for her future actions, the author instead appeals to the reader to show mercy towards her. Criseyde's father, Calchas, requests a treaty from the Trojan camp to exchange his daughter for Antenor, a Trojan lord captured by the Greeks. Both sides agree to the exchange. Upon hearing the news, Troilus laments his unfortunate fate, feeling that fortune has always been against him, and falls into despair. Troilus discusses the exchange with Pandarus, contemplating their options. Pandarus suggests that Troilus elope with Criseyde, but Troilus refuses, as he believes it would be dishonorable for a chivalrous soldier to take such actions. Criseyde, too, is deeply saddened by the news of the exchange. She is visited by her women in the palace, where she must conceal her sorrow at leaving Troy. When she is alone, she allows herself to weep. Pandarus pays her a visit and informs her of Troilus's sorrow. Meanwhile, Troilus seeks solace in a temple, contemplating the concepts of predestination and whether human choice plays a role in shaping one's fortune. Pandarus appears and reassures him that everything will work out, encouraging him to go to Criseyde. Troilus visits Criseyde, and they have an emotional discussion about her departure from Troy. Criseyde rejects the idea of running away together, believing they would regret it in the future. Instead, she assures Troilus that she will deceive her father and return to him in Troy in 10 days' time. As a token of remembrance, Troilus gives Criseyde a special brooch. Troilus leaves her in the morning, filled with a sense of foreboding. Book 5. After Criseyde is exchanged for Antenor and joins the Greek camp, Troilus is consumed by longing and anticipation for her return. Together with Pandarus, he visits King Sarpedon's villa, but the atmosphere of indulgence and revelry fails to bring him any joy. However, on the 10th day following her departure, Criseyde fails to come back to Troy as promised. In her letter to Troilus, she explains that leaving under her father's watch is too difficult. Despite missing Troilus deeply, she finds herself being wooed by Diomed, a Greek warrior who offers her protection. Eventually, she accepts Diomed as her lover, and even gives him the brooch that Troilus had gifted her. Although Criseyde feels remorse, she believes this is the best decision for her own safety. Troilus continues to wait for Criseyde's return, but he eventually realizes that she has broken her promise. He has a dream where he sees Criseyde embracing a boar, and in a heartfelt letter, he questions why she has not come back. However, her reply is brief and vague, further adding to Troilus's confusion and despair. Seeking understanding, Troilus turns to his sister Cassandra, who interprets the boar in his dream as a representation of a new lover. Despite the evidence of Criseyde's betrayal, Troilus refuses to believe it. Troilus persists in writing to Criseyde, but her responses become increasingly disinterested and curt. The revelation comes when the Trojans capture one of Diomed's garments, and Troilus discovers the brooch he had given to Criseyde attached to it, confirming her affair. Overwhelmed by grief and feeling betrayed, Troilus mourns his misfortune. Pandarus, for the first time, can offer no solace but his apologies. The narrator briefly recounts Troilus's death in battle, where he is slain by Achilles. In the 8th sphere of heaven, Troilus gains insight into the fleeting nature of earthly affairs, and even laughs at those grieving for him. The narrator reflects on the transient nature of life, concluding with a plea for the protection of the Trinity and the mercy of Christ. Themes: love and desire. Love is a central theme in the poem, highlighting the transformative power of romantic affection. The intense love between Troilus and Criseyde drives the narrative, influencing their actions and shaping their characters. The poem examines the complexities of desire, including the challenges, joys, and pains associated with passionate love. Fate and fortune. The theme of fate and fortune plays a significant role in Troilus and Criseyde. The characters' lives are subject to the whims of fate, and they often find themselves at the mercy of fortune. The poem explores the tension between human agency and the predetermined course of events, raising questions about free will and the inevitability of destiny. Honor and chivalry. Honor and chivalry are important ideals in the poem, particularly in relation to Troilus. His love for Criseyde inspires him to become a more virtuous and honorable figure, adhering to the codes of chivalry. The poem reflects on the significance of honor in matters of love, and the challenges faced in upholding these ideals. Betrayal and deception. Betrayal and deception are prevalent themes in Troilus and Criseyde. The characters experience betrayal on various levels, from Criseyde's ultimate betrayal of Troilus to the deceits and manipulations woven throughout the narrative. The poem explores the consequences of deceit and the emotional turmoil it engenders. Time and transience. The theme of time and transience permeates the poem, emphasizing the fleeting nature of human existence and the impermanence of love and happiness. The characters grapple with the passage of time and the inevitability of change, adding a sense of melancholy and reflection to the narrative. Gender and society. Troilus and Criseyde reflects on the roles and expectations placed upon individuals based on their gender, within the social and cultural context of the time. It explores the limitations and challenges faced by women, highlighting Criseyde's predicament as a woman torn between love and societal expectations.